Hello and welcome to this session or a number of classes, a session that we are going to do on post-colonial literature in English. And we are going to start with Caribbean literature, and the first book that we are going to analyze and think about and discuss is Jean Rhys' White Sargasso Sea, the very famous and a path-breaking book written in 1966 by Jean Rhys. Now, no discussion of Rhys' novel can be, we cannot start a discussion about White Sargasso Sea without a reference to Jane Eyre. Any discussion on White Sargasso Sea starts with, would have to start with a reference to Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte in 1847. It is one of the most famous, one of the most famous works written in the 19th century by a woman writer, and gender is a central theme of Jane Eyre. It is a story of a woman's coming of age, an English girl's coming of age. So it's kind of it's a female Bildungsroman. So, and it is also, in a way, it also reflects female writers kind of coming to age, because till the middle of 19th century we don't in the English canon, if we see really in the traditional English canon, in traditional literary canon of English writings, we do not really see any women writers. We do not see many women writers, but with the 19th century, with the rise of the novel, we have more and more women writers coming into being. So, not just a Bildungsroman of the character Jane Eyre, but also of, we can consider this novel as kind of coming of age of women's writing in the 19th century. And as I have said, gender is an important theme of the book. The book is about Jane's coming into being as an independent woman, not only economically but also emotionally and intellectually. So through the novel, she moves from a dependent child to a more intellectually and as well as economically a more independent woman. The whole story, not only does she have means to live on her own, but more importantly, the novel portrays her in a way that she learns to think for herself. She learns to create a kind of destiny for herself. So that kind of independence, that's what the novel is about, and there are plenty of movies made on the novel. If you want to watch any of those, I would really recommend the BBC Classics version. So somewhere in 1990s, it is a little old, but definitely one of the better versions of Jane Eyre. So through the story, as you would see, Jane goes through various hardships right from the start, where she is a poor relation to the Reed family. She is dependent on her uncle's family. And then she grows up to a more independent, economically, emotionally and intellectually independent woman. But more important part about her childhood is that, in the childhood she is quite defiant, she is passionate, she often loses control of herself. And if you see in the movie or read the book, she really fights with her cousins. She expresses her rage. She is, at one point of time, the aunt tells her that she's wild, she's unnatural. So from that kind of a child, she goes to Lowood Academy, a place for underprivileged girls, and the school kind of tames her. Her passions, it doesn't really break her, but tames her, and she learns to suppress her emotions. They don't go away. Her passionate nature does not go away, but she learns to suppress it and lead a more balanced life. She goes on to become a governess, and I think governess is a very important figure in 19th century English literature. The governess, an independent woman, unlike the upper class women like Blanche Ingram and so on. So in the novel, so she is not like the upper class women who lead a life of leisure. She is not like the upper class women who are dependent on men to kind of look after their life, look after the lifestyle and so on. So as a governess, she does not come from that privileged strata of society. She is hardworking, she's intelligent. So in a way, I think Bronte portrays her as a better woman in that sense. She is not like the lower class women. If you remember the novel or if you see the movie, she is not like a maid, right? She does not really do physical work. She's teaching, she is looking after the child in the household. So that's what makes her, in a way she stands in between. She is a liminal figure, right? Between and betwixt, she is a liminal. She stands on the border. We often see her with the family of the owners. We often see her sitting with the guests in the when they're having their funs and games. But at the same time, she's never one of them. She sits on the sides, and yet she's not one of the servants. So she kind of exists on the boundaries. So that is the story of Jane Eyre, a poor, intelligent, independent young woman. And in a way, all these things come together. We hear a lot of talk about money between Jane and the hero, or the male protagonist of the novel, Mr. Rochester, who pays her wages. And if you remember the movie, there are scenes there's a banter about giving her the money and so on. So money is in a way and kind of a subtext. She is underprivileged. Yes, she's young, attractive. So she's kind of a desirable figure, the governess, also vulnerable. So, but her character comes into being, the climactic moment in the novel is where she's standing. There's the morning of the wedding, supposed wedding between Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre, which is disrupted by the revelation of Mr. Rochester's first wife, who is alive and has been kind of shut off in the attic of Thornfield Hall. So that is the climactic moment where the novel kind of turns around, right? And her character improves, or we can say her character kind of moves to the next level as she's faced with temptation. She wants to, her heart leads on her, kind of, her love, and they are quite, Mr. Rochester is quite, he seems to be quite in love with her and wants to marry her. But she becomes a heroic woman, an ideal woman, by the act of leaving him, because it is not right, and that's where we see that she's becoming intellectually and emotionally an independent woman. So that's what I meant by coming of age as an independent woman, not just economically, where she is by various turns of fortune, she inherits wealth and she becomes kind of independent economically. But this moment is crucial, where she leaves Rochester, where she leaves Thornfield Hall, because that's where we see her kind of becoming independent in her mind, in her emotions, and so on. So far so good. That's the story. When she does come back to Rochester. The first wife is dead. Thornfield Hall is burned. She burns the first wife, Bertha Mason, the mad woman in the attic, sets fire to Thornfield Hall and falls down the roof, or kind of falls down from the roof of the Thornfield Hall. So she dies there, and Jane comes to know about it, and she comes back. And when she comes back, Mr. Rochester is disabled. He is kind of, he has burns, and he's lost the use of his hand. Jane Eyre, on the other hand, is young, independent, rich now, and yet she chooses to come back, and she marries Rochester, and finally she has what she wanted from the start, a family of her own. So from a dependent relative to an independent governess to now a married woman. And this married woman, to some of you, it might sound. My students ask that a lot of times. Why does she come back? We must remember that marriage is very important for women at the time, and that is their source of social position, social authority, and therefore Jane comes to marry Rochester. She rejects St. John and comes to marry Mr. Rochester. So far so good. That's the story of Jane Eyre. But I want you to think about madness, the theme of madness in the book, not just in terms of mad woman. If you see the movie, there is a lot of focus on madness, Grace Poole. There is a scene where there is a painting of mad people, people, asylum and so on, and Jane kind of gets scared, and we have constant these shots of her looking at that painting, looking at Grace Poole, and then Jane holding books, kind of, she's holding her own as an educated, balanced, sane English woman. Now I want you to think about the theme of madness in development of Jane's character as an English woman. Now Jane's development as a character, as an English woman, comes at the cost of the mad woman in the attic. That's what critics like Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gouvard, that's what they say, that her development as a character comes at the cost of the mad woman in the attic, is kind of the suppressed self of Jane Eyre. You remember, again, go back to her childhood. She's wild, she's passionate, she expresses her rage, she fights with her cousin, but as she grows up, slowly that is suppressed. So what is suppressed does not go away, it is somewhere deep down in her mind, that is somewhere deep down in her character. So Mr. Rochester's first wife, who he married in West Indies, she's locked away in the attic, and several critics have pointed out that she is a kind of a doppelganger. She is the darker twin of Jane Eyre. She expresses the other side of Jane Eyre, and she does exist. She's pushed away, she's locked away, just like the passion, the rage in Jane's character has been pushed away, suppressed and locked up, so that we have this figure of a composed, serene English woman. Now, so critics have insisted, or critics have read Mad Woman in the Attic, Bertha Mason, as a suppressed self of Jane, and they say that Bertha Mason is a part of Jane which has to die before a perfect English woman can be born, or can come into being, or can come of age. And that's why the coming of age, the female Bildungsroman, the English woman's coming of age, turns out or turns around, or kind of depends on the suppression of the colonized woman, right? The mad woman, Rochester's first wife, from his first marriage, comes from West Indies, is rich, is an heiress, is passionate, mad, has to be locked up in the attic and has to die, so that a perfect English woman can come up and can be projected and come and gain the foreground as an ideal of womanhood. So that is another important aspect, another important theme of Jane Eyre. Now, colonialism does not really figure prominently, at least not in foreground or overt subtext, but it is there in the background. It is there, the idea is latent in this backstory about Rochester's first marriage with Bertha Mason, who is an heiress from Jamaica, and as a husband he gains command. Why does he marry her? He marries her, he is a second son. Now, by the rule of primogeniture in England, the estate, the wealth is inherited by the firstborn, right? The wealth, the title goes to the firstborn, the first child. The second sons have to make, or the younger sons have to make their own fortune. And how does Rochester make his fortune? By marrying a rich heiress from Jamaica. It's another story that his father dies and his husband and his brother dies, and so he gets his father's wealth also. So he's kind of doubly rich. He gets his father's wealth because of the father's and brother's death, and he also gets Bertha Mason's wealth, because Bertha Mason is not the, is an heiress. That means that her father, in 19th century, it means that her father is wealthy and has settled an inheritance on her, so that whosoever marries her gets that inheritance. So Bertha never really does get the wealth. Bertha never really does get her father's, the inheritance that her father has settled on her, because wealth, property, inheritance moves from father to husband, right? Men can men gain command, men can own property, can own wealth, and so on. And women, in a way, even an heiress is important, because the husband would gain command or gain her wealth. She does not really have any authority or has any freedom, or does not have any freedom to kind of use that wealth, because it moves from father to husband. So in Jane Eyre, we are just told that Rochester married her in West Indies, but he later on discovered that she was mad, right? She is, if you see in the novel and also in the movie, she is portrayed as violent, almost animal-like. We do not really hear much about her except her madness. We do not see her, we do not hear her background except what is relevant to this Englishman, that she is wealthy. We do not really hear about anything about her except what is told to us in this very English setup, that it comes across as if Rochester is the victim of this some kind of a charade, some kind of a fraud, where a mad Caribbean woman was thrust on him. So we do not really deliberate, the novel does not really deliberate or does not think about the fact that this man married Bertha Mason for money, because most probably when Bronte is writing in the early 19th century, these considerations were not important. It was almost taken for granted that it was almost kind of right, natural, that husband should gain wealth from a rich wife, or a wife who brings in a lot of inheritance. So so I want you to kind of think about and pay attention to this stereotype of a colonial woman, mad, passionate, rich, seductive, and the contrast she makes to the English woman, so that in the English woman, the ideal woman, English woman, looks so much better. So White Sargasso Sea is a prequel to Jane Eyre. Rochester is really never, Rees does not really name Rochester in her book, in White Sargasso Sea. He is always referred to as a name, he is always referred to as he or the man. So he's kind of he remains nameless in the novel, in White Sargasso Sea, but Rees has made it clear in her correspondence with her friends, and it is quite, and especially in the last part of the book with reference to Grace Poole and all, it is quite clear that it is written as a response to Jane Eyre. So this is a story of, it's kind of a prequel to what happened before the events in Jane Eyre. So Rochester, as I said, is not named. We get to learn what happened in West Indies. How did he acquire a wife? Why did she go mad? We know that as a second son, he does not have any right over over the father's property. So his older brother is going to inherit everything. So he has to find a way to make his own fortune, and he marries Bertha Mason, and this is White Sargasso Sea is about the sequence of events in Jamaica, what happened there, and Dominica, and then it finally moves to England. Now I want to leave you with this little clip from BBC version of Jane Eyre, and just to kind of make you think about the themes that we have talked about, especially the two women being kind of mirrors to each other, and also the theme of colonialism, which is a subtext which is kind of underlies this story.